What makes a man haunted? Not the games you played, not the perfect angles or the words rehearsed in front of a mirror. What lingers in his chest when the noise dies down isn't your prettiness, it's the echo of something deeper. The moment he couldn't quite name but couldn't forget either. The pause in your voice when you said something real, the flicker of pain in your eyes when you tried to smile through it, the crack in your soul that you never tried to hide. These are the fingerprints you leave on a man's spirit, not because you demanded to be remembered, but because you let him see something that asked for nothing. You didn't force your way into his mind. You became a quiet, sacred place inside of it. And that's what haunts a man, the feeling that he was witnessed, that he was known, maybe even understood, without having to earn it. You didn't decorate yourself for his attention. You stood there, naked in your truth, and whispered something that shook the foundation of his forgetting. Not the kind of woman who fills his screen, the kind who fills the silence, the kind who doesn't just say, "I love you," but speaks in frequencies that say, "I see you, and I'm still here." That's what stays. That's what burns. Because it wasn't about the words you said, it was about the way your presence made him feel something he couldn't unfeel. In a world where women are taught to become illusions, you were the mirror. In a culture of performance, you dared to be a pause, and that's why he still thinks of you. Not because of what you gave him, but because of what you unlocked in him. You didn't try to be unforgettable, you just refused to be inauthentic. You weren't loud, you were soul level, and men forget loud, but they never forget the woman who handed them a moment of themselves, unmasked, unarmored, raw. So no, it's not about saying the right thing. It's about becoming the kind of truth that even silence can't hide. It's about recognizing that the words that haunt a man aren't clever. They're sacred. They are vibrations, not just syllables. They live in the body, not the brain. And once he's felt that kind of real, he'll look for it everywhere, but only remember it in you. So before we speak the 3 words, you have to understand this. They don't work unless they come from a woman who's willing to be seen without the costume, who isn't trying to lure him, but to liberate him. And that's exactly why it works. Because truth, when spoken without agenda, doesn't need to be repeated. It lives rent-free in the soul of the one who wasn't ready to receive it. And he will think about you, not because you wanted him to, but because you showed him a version of himself he didn't know existed, until you did. You don't need to say much for a man to hear you. The words that stay aren't always the ones you speak, they're the ones he feels in your silence. In the space between what you could have said and what you didn't need to. That's the echo he can't outrun, because anyone can talk. But few women can hold the kind of silence that hums with truth, the kind that makes a man lean in, not because he wants to hear you, but because he wants to feel you. That's what lives in his chest, not the texts you sent or the way you crafted your responses, but the moments when you didn't chase, when your stillness became a mirror he wasn't prepared to look into. And in that mirror, he didn't see your longing, he saw his lack. The gap between who he was and who he wanted to be in your presence. You see, the 3 words that make a man think about you all day aren't just tools, they're revelations. But before they land, he has to feel the contrast between your essence and everything he's ever known. Most women try to fill the space. You didn't. You stood in it. And that unnerved him in ways he couldn't explain, because men aren't haunted by what's said. They're haunted by what's felt. By the moment when your eyes said, "I know you," before you ever did. By the shift in the air when you walked into a room without trying to be seen. By the fact that your energy didn't chase him, and somehow that made him chase himself. He won't remember the details of your face in 10 years. But he will remember how your silence wrapped around his chaos like a question he never knew he needed to answer. That's the power. Not seduction, not strategy, but a woman who isn't afraid to take up sacred space with her presence alone. Because when you speak from that place, when you finally say the 3 words, they don't land in his ears. They sink into his bones. They become tethered to his inner world, like a frequency he didn't know he was tuned to. So before you say anything, you have to understand the prelude is everything. Your stillness, your essence, your restraint. When you stop trying to be chosen, you become unforgettable. When you no longer need him to validate your worth, he begins to question why he ever couldn't see it. And that's the echo. That's the weight of what's unspoken. That's what follows him into his quiet moments, his cold mornings, his restless nights. It's not what you said, it's what you didn't say, but embodied so loudly it cracked open a part of him he thought was unreachable. So when the 3 words finally come, they won't just be heard. They'll be remembered. Because they'll ride on the back of everything you've already made him feel. There's a moment when everything changes. When a woman stops performing, the whole energy of the room shifts. Not because she's louder, but because she's no longer trying. Not to impress, not to be good enough, not to play the role that was handed to her by a world terrified of her rawness. That's when she becomes unforgettable. Because suddenly, she's not trying to be anything. She just is. She speaks and you feel it. She looks and you unravel. And if a man happens to be in her orbit, he won't know what hit him. He'll think it's her beauty, her mystery, her independence. But it's none of that. It's the absence of pretending, the purity of presence, the stillness that comes when a woman is no longer bending herself to be desired. She becomes truth. And truth doesn't chase. It doesn't decorate itself for approval. It doesn't shrink to fit his narrative. It simply exists. Unapologetically, devastatingly whole. And in the presence of that kind of woman, a man doesn't see a prize. He sees a portal, a reflection, a chance to meet himself if he dares. Because when she stops performing, he can no longer perform either. His charm, his avoidance, his games, they all collapse in her field. Because she's not reacting. She's not responding to the mask, she's looking through it. And that stare, that energetic confrontation, it shakes him. Not because she said anything, but because she didn't. Because she doesn't need to beg, doesn't need to please, doesn't need to earn his attention. She's beyond that. And that's when he starts thinking about her. Not because she was trying to be unforgettable, but because she stopped trying to be anything at all. And in that surrender, she became everything. A woman who no longer performs is dangerous, not in the manipulative way, but in the sacred way, because she calls forward only what's real. She repels the half-hearted. She dismantles the ego with a smile, and if he's not ready, he'll run. But if he's tired of illusions, he'll remember her. He'll remember the way she didn't fill the silence with insecurity, the way she didn't reach for him when he pulled away, the way she said exactly what she meant, and meant exactly what she said. He'll remember that kind of woman because he won't meet her twice. You see, when you stop performing, you stop being repeatable. You become a one-time encounter with something holy. You become a rite of passage. You become the moment that split him in half, before and after you, not because you changed him, but because you returned to yourself, and in doing so, you reminded him what real feels like. So the 3 words, they begin here, in your decision to drop the role, to stop being the fantasy, to stop trying to be what he wants, and start being what he needs, even if he never says it. The kind of woman who doesn't perform, she reveals, and that's why she lingers. That's why she's never forgotten. I see you. 3 words, quiet, simple. But when they come from a woman who has stopped performing, they land like a revelation, not because they flatter him, not because they stroke his ego, but because they pierce through it. Because when you say, I see you, and you mean it, you're not just acknowledging the surface. You're speaking to the man beneath the armor, beneath the image he spent his whole life constructing, beneath the charm, the wit, the detachment. You're calling out the one part of him he hides from the world, and maybe even from himself. And in that moment, he can't run. Not really. Because when someone sees you without needing anything from you, it's disarming, haunting, liberating, terrifying. Most men don't know what it feels like to be seen in this way. They're used to being watched, judged, measured, desired for what they provide, how they look, or what role they play. But to be seen without performance, that's intimacy. That's the first doorway. And when a woman looks at him and says those 3 words from a grounded place, not because she wants to keep him, but because she's already whole, something ancient stirs in his bones. He remembers. He remembers what it felt like to be soft before the world told him to harden. He remembers the boy he buried beneath the man. He remembers the ache he never named. And that's why he thinks of you. Not because you said anything extraordinary, but because you saw him in a way that no one else did, and you didn't flinch, you didn't run, you didn't try to fix him, you simply stood there steady in your witnessing. That's power, that's magnetism without manipulation, that's soul-level gravity, because when you say, I see you, you're not seducing him, you're awakening him, you're reminding him that he's more than what he's had to become to survive, and even if he walks away, even if his fear outweighs his readiness, he will remember you. He will remember the first time someone looked at him and didn't need him to be anything other than everything he already was. That kind of memory doesn't fade. It lives in the quiet spaces, in the pause between distractions, in the echo of your gaze. And so, if you're going to say the 3 words, know this: they don't work if you're pretending. They only land when your vision is rooted in truth, in compassion, in clarity. You cannot fake presence. You cannot speak soul to soul while still living in your mask. But when you drop it, when you anchor into who you are, your words become spells, not to control, but to awaken. And that awakening will chase him, long after you've gone silent, long after you've walked away. Because the power of I see you isn't that it makes him want you, it's that it makes him want to become the man he forgot he could be. I want you. The second phrase. The one that breaks men open, not with desperation but with fire. Not spoken from lack, but from a woman who's done the work of becoming whole. When you say, I want you from that place, it doesn't cling, it doesn't beg, it burns, because you're not asking to be completed. You're choosing from overflow, and that changes everything. Most men are used to being needed, not wanted. They're used to transactional connection, to being desired for the role they play, the security they offer, the attention they give. But to be wanted, not as a means to fill a void, but as a conscious choice, that's rare, that's sacred, and that's unforgettable. Because when a woman who is deeply rooted in herself says, I want you, it sounds like thunder in the heart of a man who's never been truly chosen. Not the version of him that performs, the real him, the messy, evolving, imperfect him. She's not trying to possess him. She's not using him to escape herself. She's simply saying, I see your chaos. I see your depth. I see your pain. And even still, I want you. That kind of wanting is violent in its gentleness. It strips away all the layers. It silences the noise. It stands firm in truth. And truth, when spoken without fear, doesn't ask for permission. It claims, not from ego but from soul. And that's what a man remembers. Because in that moment, you're not trying to manipulate his thoughts. You're becoming unforgettable through presence alone. The I want you that changes everything doesn't come from the lips. It comes from the body, the eyes, the energy. It's felt long before it's heard. And when he feels it, he knows. He knows you're not trying to win him. You're not trying to convince him. You've already chosen yourself. And that's why your choice of him means something. Because if a woman like you wants him, he has to ask himself why. And that question, that's the one that keeps him up at night. That's the one that lingers in the space between his distractions. Because your wanting is an invitation, not to a performance, but to a deeper version of himself. And that's terrifying and magnetic all at once. So say it if it's true, but don't say it to pull him closer. Say it to stand in your power. Say it to embody your sovereignty. Say it to let him feel the weight of being wanted by a woman who doesn't need him, but still chooses him. And that's the fire. That's the spell. That's the echo. Because he will forget the women who asked for his attention. But he will never forget the one who looked him in the eyes, steady, unrushed, and said, I want you, like it was a declaration, not a plea. That kind of truth doesn't fade. It burns, and it keeps burning, until he's ready to rise into it or run from it. But either way, he won't forget. I release you. The third phrase, the one that breaks the spell and simultaneously makes it eternal, because nothing haunts a man more than a woman who lets go from a place of love instead of bitterness. A woman who doesn't slam the door but opens it, not as an exit but as a mirror. Most people confuse release with rejection, but when you say, I release you, and it's not about winning, not about pride, not about punishment, but truth. He feels it in a place deeper than desire. He feels it in the part of himself that was tethered to your presence, even if he never had the courage to hold it. You're not walking away because he failed you. You're walking away because you remembered your worth. You're not letting go because you stopped caring. You're letting go because you finally stopped trying to convince someone to meet you where you've already arrived. And that kind of release, it lingers, it humbles, it pierces, because you didn't just choose him. You also chose to let him go when he couldn't choose himself. You let go of the fantasy. You let go of who you needed him to be. You let go of the version of you that was trying to prove she was worthy of being held. And in that letting go, you didn't lose him. You found you. You found the woman who no longer needs to be chosen to feel valuable. You found the peace that comes when you no longer grip what was never yours to hold. And he'll feel that. Long after the last conversation, long after the messages stop, long after the silence becomes the norm. He will remember the moment when you said, "I release you," and meant it. Not with resentment, but with reverence, because you didn't curse him, you blessed him. You didn't chain yourself to pain, you freed him, and in doing so, you freed yourself. That's what men remember. Not the woman who begged, not the one who broke, but the one who bowed out with dignity, the one who held space for what could have been, and then laid it down like an offering. And in that laying down, she became something sacred, something he'll measure every connection against. Because she didn't leave to punish him. She left to protect her peace. And that kind of departure, it stays, it echoes. It becomes the ache behind his smile when he thinks about her in quiet moments. So when you say, "I release you," say it from your wholeness. Say it from the part of you that no longer needs to control the outcome. Say it from the part of you that has finally learned that real love is never about holding tight. It's about letting go when holding on becomes self-abandonment. That's the final phrase, the most powerful one. Not because it pulls him toward you, but because it leaves him with the weight of everything he could have had and everything you chose to walk away from, gracefully, silently, powerfully. Men don't miss perfect. Perfect is forgettable, predictable, replaceable. What they miss, what echoes in the cracks of their peace, is what was real. The woman who didn't decorate herself to be loved. The one who wasn't flawless but was present. Who didn't try to impress but left an imprint. He won't remember the one who said all the right things. He'll remember the one who said the real things. The woman who didn't hide her trembling. The one who cried in front of him not to manipulate him, but because her truth spilled out before she could censor it. He'll miss that, even if he couldn't hold it, especially if he couldn't hold it, because deep down, men crave what they're afraid of, depth, not the version of you that was edited to be palatable, the version that was wild, unpredictable, soft and sacred all at once, the version that told the truth even when it made things uncomfortable. The one who didn't need to be right, but needed to be honest. That's what stays, because it's rare, because it demands something of him that he spent a lifetime avoiding. Presence. You didn't just offer love, you offered presence. You saw him without illusion. You touched him without strategy. You let him see you, not the curated you, not the pleasing you, but the woman underneath the armor. And when you speak from that place, whether it's "I see you," "I want you," or "I release you," he feels it in a place no one else has ever touched. That's why he'll think of you. That's why your name will feel like a question mark years after the chapter has closed. Because you weren't perfect, you were true, and truth leaves stains on the soul. It doesn't fade. It doesn't dissolve into the next distraction. It lingers, it haunts, because it asks to be integrated. And most men aren't ready, so they leave. But they never quite leave you. They carry you. In glances, in songs, in women they try to compare you to, but never can. Because perfection doesn't ask for presence, but real does. Real cracks the mirror. Real exposes the fault lines. Real is messy, holy, and uncontainable. You were real, and that's what terrifies a man. Because to hold a real woman, he has to become a real man. He has to strip. He has to feel. He has to show up in ways no one ever taught him. And if he isn't ready, he'll run. But even in his running, you'll follow him. Not because you chase, but because he can't unfeel the truth. He can't unsee what you reflected. He can't replace what was never performative. So don't aim to be perfect. Don't aim to be unforgettable. Be real. Be the rupture that made him feel something true, even if it broke him, especially if it broke him. Because broken men don't heal from perfect love, they heal from real. You were never just his muse. Muses inspire from a distance, safe, idealized, untouchable. But you were the mirror, and mirrors don't flatter, they reveal. You didn't reflect back who he pretended to be. You reflected who he really was underneath the mask. And that scared him more than anything, because being inspired is easy, but being seen, that's confrontation, that's raw, that's real. He didn't expect it. The way your presence peeled back his layers without trying. The way your silence asked questions his ego wasn't ready to answer. You didn't perform, you reflected. You didn't entertain, you invited. And in that sacred space, he saw himself in ways he never had. You didn't need to say much. Your gaze alone held a truth that undressed him, emotionally, spiritually, soulfully. That's why he remembers you. That's why he thinks about you even when he tries not to. Not because you were perfect, but because you were honest. You didn't ask him to change, but your presence made staying asleep impossible. And that kind of energy, it doesn't fade with time. It echoes. When a man meets a mirror, he either rises or retreats. Most retreat, but even in retreat, they carry the reflection. Because mirrors aren't forgotten. They haunt. Not with pain, but with truth. So don't mourn being too much. You were never too much. You were just too true for someone still hiding from himself. It's not the noise he remembers. It's the quiet. The silence after you left. The space where your energy once lived. That's where the 3 words began to echo. I see you. I want you. I release you. He didn't hear them then, but he hears them now. Not because you're speaking, but because you're gone. You didn't leave with a scream. You left with truth. And truth lingers. You weren't trying to haunt him, but truth always haunts when it's been rejected. He might have dismissed your presence, but he can't unfeel it. He can't unknow the version of himself you awakened. Your love didn't demand, it revealed. Your words didn't bind, they freed. And that freedom, it's what he misses the most, because no one since you has spoken with that kind of clarity, that kind of softness, that kind of depth. You didn't need to convince him, you just needed to be, and that being changed everything. He'll search for you in others. He'll crave the echo without knowing its origin, but you'll remain not in body but in energy, not in contact but in impact, because the woman who says, I see you, I want you, and I release you isn't forgettable. She's unforgettable, not by force, but by essence. And in the silence, that truth still speaks.